Welcome to EPG Pathshala of Geography paper, which is named as Resource Geography, and I am Dr. Seema Mehra Parihar, who has been teaching Resource Geography for last 30 years, PhD in Natural Resource Management, and specializes further for my postdoc in Geoinformatics and Web GIS from ITC Netherlands. Let us talk today about the policy framework in the context of India, and that is what is the title of the paper, where we talk about policy models of India for resource management. So, what will you learn about it? Just as in the previous lectures, where you have talked about the policy framework of different subjects, United Nations policies, world level and other policy frameworks. Now, let us contextualize ourselves and understand the resource management policies of India, understand the role of various institutions involved in resource management, critically analyze the pro-imperial capital friendly trend in resource management practices. So, this is something which we are going to go ahead and take our journey towards understanding and how we are working and functioning. The keywords are empowerment, tribal, Indian community, institutions management, and above all those policy framework. In case if you look at India, historically we recognize that it as a region which abounds in diversity, diversity of natural resources, diversity of people. Since the very beginning of Aryan invention, resource appropriation became a major source of amassing the power to control and rule over the society. The aloofness became a legitimate tool to establish a hegemonic right over the resource. But do you think anyone has that? The Vedic period saw the legitimization of the accumulation through dispossession. Brahmanical textbooks are full of couplets which sanction the sole right of the Brahmanical caste over the resources. Is it right? That is something which we all have always been, we all have grown up thinking that. But after the inception of feudalism in India, the rules related to right over the resources have still been largely dominated by few. The coming of British in India opened the gates for the modern philosophical setup. The idea of equality, justice and fraternity brought a small change in the violence essentially. Now, in case if you look at the society, which largely talks about that the resource use should be with this, with him, with her and all that. After 1947, when Indian state became independent, the constitution brought a rampant change in the life and philosophy of Indians. For the first time in Indian history, right to property became an equal right for the all citizens, Article 31, 1950. The constitution provides special rights and promises to protect the tribal rights over their resources, Schedule 5th and 6th. In the year 1991, the Indian government opened the gate for foreign capital by signing the WTO agreement. This largely, the WTO agreement proved the death nail for the tribal rights of appraiser and management of the natural resources. Of course, we all know this is unjust, or maybe few decision makers are loving it. The laws like Coal Bearing Act, SEZ and all that here is facilitating global imperial expansionism. Do we want India like that? In India, those concerned with resource management are mostly dealing with the resources like water, air and soil, which are the concerns of the consumerist middle class. The concern of lower and the underclass remains unaddressed or just simply non-existent. Indigenous tribal techniques of resource management are being redundant. This has also led to the loss of human resource, which is so sad in independent India of 70 years. Where the economists call human capital is something which is just not being taken care of. Dotted with deep ravines and hills rich in bauxite which gives the color to the soil, this region is also home to some of the most endangered tribes in the country. Birjias, Birhors, Kaurva, Parhayas and Asurs. The area of their concentration is limited to just simple 150 kilometers from capital Ranchi and an hour and a half drive from Bishanpur. But what we find that resources around that are, where are they for those people? The extinction and the loss of this human capital does not become a cause of discourse for the intellectuals. Indian state expansion and its comparative existence is solely due to resource appropriation. The state is on the tide at the cost of poorest of poor, whose resources are to be managed by the state for the interest of some foreign capitalists. That is what Roy says in 1999, but things are changing, things are moving ahead, and we are hopeful. Natural resources management for poverty alleviation programs exist. Environmental degradation has a cause and effect relationship with poverty. The thin layer of soil that covers most of the earth's land surface is the key to human well-being and survival. Of course, we do not want any people who is struggling with poverty. Without it, there would be no plants, no crops, no animals, no forests, and no people. However, about 40% of the earth's land surface and more than 1 billion people are affected by land degradation. Isn't it sad? Degraded lands are home to the poorest segment of the rural population. Do they have land? Natural resources provide fundamental life support in the form of both consumptive and public good services. Ecological processes maintain soil productivity, nutrient recycling, cleansing of air and water, and climatic cycles. But still, the gap, the divide exists. Soils are the foundation of agriculture, the upper layer of the land, which in turn is the basic building block in the livelihood of all people. But at the genetic level, we are finding diversity found in natural life forms, supports the breeding programs necessary to protect and improve cultivated plants and domesticated animals, and still there is a diversity. Some are having and some are not having. Wild flora and fauna form the basis of traditional medicine and a significant part of the modern pharmacological industry. In ecologically fragile, marginal environment, the poor are often locked into the patterns of natural resource degradation by their lack of access to productive resources. Don't we want just simple productive resources for one and all? Institutional services, again with few. Credit and technology services, again with few. Why is that? That's a big question. Without these resources, they are compelled to overstrain already eroding lands in order to survive. What we find is the resource, where the prime definition is use for the people, certainly you find around that other words which are just simply like near to that, that's abuse, overuse, underuse. Again, all those that in the Zimmerman's language is taking you towards a resistance for poor people. The increased pressure on land through deforestation, overgrazing and overcultivation causes a decline in soil fertility and production, and thus further aggravates poverty. Farmer suicides again are happening because of agrarian somewhere irregularities. Relationship between rural poverty and environmental degradation is clear today. Unless degradation is to be addressed directly, sustainability of the rural development projects will be undermined and attempts to elevate rural poverty will be jeopardized. Do we actually want that? So, let us look into now institutions and the policy models which are there. Institutions at different level works in India, definitely, and we are very proud of that to address the question of resource management and policy making in that direction. The different institution works for different resources, following other resources for which different policies are framed by the concerned institutions. Of course, we cannot handle all the resources because of the paucity of time and a singular lecture. Here, the main framework is to tell you about forestry and the water and the policy related framework that is there. Let us talk about forests. Let us talk about forestry. Forests cover almost 1/5 of the national land area of India. About 42% of these are degraded. Isn't it sad? Recent surveys indicate a slight increase in the forest area over the last 2 years. However, this data is an insufficient indicator of the condition of India's forests, since levels of aggregation reveal little about the trends in quality. Degradation, not deforestation, is currently considered to be the major problem, and we have to take care of that. Deforestation has reduced due to the massive afforestation programs, but we have to continue that, and changes in government policies over the last 25 years. We need to congratulate ourselves for that. Pressure on the existing forest is due to following reasons. Of course, you know it. I will just recapitulate and revise it. Shrinking common property resource base, rapidly increasing human and livestock population, and poverty are some of the factors contributing to the pressure on the existing forest. Though pressure from forest dependent local people is often cited as a major cause of forest degradation, it has also been the result of intervention by multiple actors, and we all recognize that. Why will local women who is going for a fuel wood and all that will do that? Ujjwala scheme are finally, happily telling us and not disturbing the forest that's around people, especially in the hilly areas. And what we find is that the same area of forest at different points in different time is behaving in a very different way in case if we guide the local people and the community comes into the rescue. About 200 million of India's around 1 billion population with more than 68 million tribal are partially or wholly dependent on forest resources for their livelihood. There is a strong correlation between the location of tribal people, high poverty areas and forests. Forestry is estimated to contribute to about 1% of GDP, but this does not include subsistence use and local market transactions. Large scale industry, please note this, this is very important. Large scale industry, mostly for pulp and paper, uses only about 10% of the forest raw material, while about 23,000 sawmills and a large number of cottage units process 90% of it. Industry is there with a big mouth. The authority and resources for protection and management of the forest are vested, we all know, with the state forest departments. It is widely recognized that given the expanse and diversity of forest lands and people within the country, the forest department lacks the capacity in its present form to take care effectively and implement the forest policy and the law. Inability to regulate access to forest lands and increase appreciation for people's dependence on forests have paved the way for policies and programs that seek participation of village communities in development and protection of forests, social forestry programs of the 70s and 80s and joint forest management programs of the 90s, and that is something which is so very good thing that is happening, and that may be the reason why we find that little expansion of the forest resource base in the country. Besides, we will also recognize the remote sensing data, and many people, the ones who are so much in favor of that, is taking care of this particular forest resource base of our nation. Currently, in case if you look at it, such programs are manifested in various schemes related to regeneration of natural forest through JFM, wasteland and watershed development programs, block plantations, promotion of farm forestry and agroforestry, eco-restoration, etc., etc. The Steering Committee on Environment, Forest and Wildlife identifies first increase in the forest cover through JFM, agroforestry, urban forestry and afforestation of wasteland as a major area thrust for the 5-year plans. The other areas of focus are to build capacity for conservation and development of natural resources, increase forest productivity, reduce demand and supply imbalances, increase export and reduce import of timber and pulpwood and other forest produce. So, therefore, we find that they are helping the nation. Forest policy and the program framework, although India has well articulated forest policy, this has not been fully reflected in strategies for implementation. A coherent strategy to meet the many diverse demands for forest products and services from the forest sector is lacking. The driving force behind the current forest strategy in National Forest Policy of 1988, which stresses the following: number 1, management of forests for cultivation and local needs, and makes commercial exploitation of forest, revenue generation becomes a secondary objective. 1988 forest policy has not been translated into law. It remains a broad statement of government intent and does little in the way of specifying any legal rights or duties owed to the forest communities. that is something like, despite having 1988 until today, it has not been converted into a law. The forest rules and institutional framework continue to be archaic and disabling in relation to new approaches and strategies. The social forestry programs of the 80s led to some innovation in the legislative and institutional framework, but they proved to be short-lived. Why? Either due to lack of application or due to undermining by other rules which negated the power, control and access provided to the local community. In case if you look at it, within government program design, there is now an increasing rhetoric on the symbiotic relationship between forests and forest dwellers, and of the need to address the issue of poverty, elevation, provision of gainful employment and empowerment of tribal and women in the forest sector. Isn't it so nice? We think of empowerment, and the latest government sponsored forest development program is Samanvit Gramin Varikaran Smriddhi Yojana, SGVSY, or Integrated Rural Forestry Development Program, and all of them have similar themes: empowering the local communities, expanding the forest resource base. SGVSY, which is an umbrella scheme under which most of the previous central government sponsored schemes have been merged, is implemented in areas and villages covered either under joint forest management or eco development programs. Apart from focusing on creation of rural employment and community assets, the scheme provides for constitution of a registered forest development agency, FDA, a federation of village level forest organization for planning, fund delivery and monitoring the scheme. That is something which is definitely there. Experiences from the field shows that FDAs, which are to be registered as societies under the Societies Registration Act, need further elaboration of their objective, structure, functions and power to be an effective institution for supporting JFMs and joint forest management initiatives. Formally initiated in 1989, JFM is currently at the center stage of India's forest strategy and is also doing a lot of good work, especially in the neighborhood communities. Over the past decade, over 15% of the country's forest lands are estimated to have been brought under JFMs. In absolute terms, nearly 45,000 JFM groups are involved in protection of forests in 22 states of the country. Then decentralized, that is something which we all strive for in the federal structure and democratic setup. In the year 2000, fresh guidelines issued by the central government addressed critical issues related to legal backup of the JFM committees, participation of women in JFM, extension of JFM to dense forest area, preparation of micro plans in JFM areas, conflict resolution and recognition of self-initiated groups. A JFM cell and a JFM network of foresters have been constituted at the center to monitor the impact of JFM and to ensure uniformity in policy among various states. What is important to recognize here is that one is trying to make communities empowered, to make women of those communities empowered, to make tribal community of those communities to be empowered, and the forest export base to be expanded so that everybody can get involved in enhancing, in utilizing and also in providing employment. Isn't that in case, imagine a situation, a scenario where you become a decision maker tomorrow and you decide, now I have to create an institution where I can take my country's forest resource base forward. How will you do it? You will of course like A, first of all to expand the forest resource base. B, you will like the people who are involved in the forest to expand their living experience and also to empower them and to make them feel that the forest which is there in the neighborhood is theirs. Now, after doing this, let us get ourselves closer to another natural resource which we all know is so important, and which is all we know that we cannot live without. And the policy models related to water in our country are also gone through encouraging developments in recent years, and we find that there has been a recognition, an attempt to address the fundamental issue of impacting the water sector at the government level. This recognition is reflected in two key documents of National Water Policy 2002 and the Revised Watershed Guidelines 2001. The National Water Policy 2002 emphasizes the need for sustainable water resource management, conjunctive use of the surface and groundwater resources, groundwater regulation, and people's participation in management of natural resources. The latter explicitly mentioning the participatory irrigation management, and this is something, a marked change from the earlier version. We are very happy that everybody is talking about people getting involved in solving another resource called water. But the question is, and the key area of a discussion is it actually happening? Further, the National Water Policy 2003-2 considers user contribution and tariff rationalization while discussing sector finances. In sum, the National Water Policy 2002 presents a positive picture, though not without shortcomings, but a positive picture. It's a great going. A similar observation can be made regarding the Revised Watershed Guidelines. Again, these emphasize much cherished values of sustainability. I am so happy about. Equity, again a positive step. Participation and transparency. It is something which is so nice. We are talking about transparency. Changes have been made to allow greater funding allocation and PRI involvement. Whether policy intent expressed in these documents can be realized remains a moot question. For example, the objects of the National Water Policy 2002 vis-a-vis groundwater regulation and tariff rationalization, though aligned with donor and expert prescriptions, are unlikely to find political and popular support. The earlier National Watershed Guidelines 1994 are another case in point. Hailed as revolutionary step, these have still failed to inspire actual performance for a variety of reasons. Now, what are these reasons? Let's get into that. They include weak primary and secondary stakeholder capacities. Stakeholders also need to have a capacity. No, you want water, you don't have a capacity. Existing social political dynamics, how can we forget that? And institutional imperatives. Somewhere along the line, we still feel that the connections, knowing each other, near to the power structures, can only pave way for any institutional framework to work. But all of you, the ones who are listening to this lecture, I would like to impress upon you, if there is a policy that's there, whether it will be successful or not successful, it's in your hands too. You have your residential welfare associations. Go ahead and do it. Of course, what we recognize today is that holistic management, integrated management is something that's in thing, and we have to take it going. And that's what is there in our setup too. Indian water resource management context, we need to appreciate that the government's role as developer and manager of water resource has persisted throughout the last 5 decades, and something so positive, and we need to congratulate the country for it. The fact that resource boundaries basin or watershed do not match administrative boundary is a clear-cut physical issue, and this has certainly hindered effective and sustainable basin level development. What do you mean by that? Imagine, visualize, we have a state, we've got Uttarakhand, we've got Uttar Pradesh. Now there is this Ganga river that's flowing, we also have a Namo Ganga project. Now this is flowing from Jahanvi river. When it comes down, there is a basin. Now Jahanvi river, and then it comes down, and then it becomes a Bhagirathi. At Dev Prayag, you also have an Alaknanda flowing, and Alaknanda, and when it meets the Bhagirathi at Dev Prayag, it becomes Ganga. But then what we find is, it's in Uttarakhand, it's coming from there, then it mixes to UP and the other states. So, the question is that this is not matching the physical boundary of a river basin, is not matching the state boundary. There are certain conflicts. What is a basin? Basin is that catchment area of a river where you have a single outlet and you find that you have just a singular flow that is coming. Whether it is a first order, second order, third order, fourth order, fifth order, whatever. But the point is, this is not matching administrative boundaries. And what happens is that the money flow that goes at a block level or at tehsil level and the further administrative block level, village level and so on and so forth is not the one that is a watershed level boundary. So, we need to work on that, but that is a physical issue, but as an approach it is wonderful, still it is better than many. While the central government has voiced its intent, starting with the National Water Policy of 1987 to enable integration, there has been resistance from the states, resulting in allocation based rules for negotiation on surface water rights. People, because again there is a problem, you have a state list and a central list, there is an issue. These 22 strategies for SIDA support in the field of natural resource management in India are mostly unaffecting population factored and not resource or situation based. Hence, integrated water resource management initiatives would require, number one, enabling policy force, a driver, and legislative change. On another note, a major factor that has led to groundwater exploitations and iniquitous appropriation of water resources is the significant subsidization of irrigation and electricity services. Again, subsidy to whom and subsidy when? The reforms in these two sectors attempted during the last decade have encountered resistance from farmer lobbies. The above is merely an illustration of the range of factors that account for differences in policy and practice. Thus, it is necessary that donors interested in water conservation and management accord priority to translating policy into practice. We need to translate policy into practice rather than developing a preoccupation with influencing policy, which is something that somewhere along the line we all need to understand. Government Initiative of Watershed Development is one of the large centrally sponsored programs, and I can say that largely successful besides physical limitations. Since 1995, watershed development projects have been implemented under new national guidelines using funding from the variety of the centrally sponsored schemes. While watershed development projects have led to the creation of water harvesting structures, which is so nice. First was demarcation, delineation using remote sensing imageries. The crucial aspect of water conservation and sustainable management have somewhere along the line have not been so successful as they should have been. The actual control of water resources at the village level still rests with a few large farmers. And these programs have not been able to offer arrangements and institutions to manage land and water resources sustainably. Of course, they want it. Intents are right. But when it comes to implementation, there are a few glitches. We are working towards it. We are positive. The National Watershed Guidelines 1994 marked the shift from departmental works with an emphasis on people's participation. Village watershed committees, parallel institutions of the Gram Panchayats were entrusted responsibility for planning, implementation and management of interventions with the role of line departments, so wonderful, such as forest, soil and water conservation, irrigation, etc. All with experience of natural resource management activity. That's something so nice. Everybody is involved. But again, we know the power structures. But we are hopeful. In practice, this has not happened. Local capacities were limited. The poor were diffident. People-line departments' relations were unequal. The guidelines were interpreted to suit vested interests. And the community mobilization and training efforts were not systematic. But again, just remember, it's a good step that we are at least recognizing of these things. And it's not there in all, it's changing. The things are changing and we are so hopeful for that. The other programs that encourages water conservation is the Accelerated Rural Water Supply and Sanitation Program, ARWSP. About 20% of the funds under this program can be used for water quality improvement, so nice, and conservation. Most of this allocation is used for addressing water quality issues. The water conservation part of the program is limited to ensuring the sustainability of drinking water supplies alone, precluding integrated management of village level water resources. But drinking water, we realize, is a major issue also. By the 90s, with the realization that functionality and sustainability need to be ensured to make the substantial investments meaningful, the mission embarked on a sector reform program, SRP. The aims of empowering PRIs or the communities to generate resources, plan for resources, operate and manage water supply schemes themselves in coordination with government agencies, private sectors and non-governmental organizations, NGOs. The important and the relevant and the key elements of the strategy are: number one, promoting a demand-driven approach; second, institutionalizing community participation in capital cost sharing at least 10% and full cost of operation and maintenance; village level capacity building program for planning and management through setting up and empowering village water and sanitation committees. Isn't it right? We are going from top to bottom and we are going there. It's something so nice. And the Watson committee suggested all that: integration of service delivery mechanism in Watson involving multiple agencies. We are finding that since 2000, 20% of the annual ARWSP outlay has been earmarked for states progressing towards sector reform. The SRP is currently being implemented in 63 districts of 26 states across the country. It is in principle a significant initiative that marks a departure from the conventional allocation-based rural water supply programs. Substantial funds have been placed at the district level, and a nascent but emerging awareness about reforms in the sector is evident. However, the different institutional arrangements which exist are decided upon by the states, because they are the ones. It's the central government and the state government. Lack of clarity of institutional roles and continuing primacy of the executing department 15 indicates that much remains to be done. But much has been done also, particularly in eliciting user participation and ownership and designing equitable and financially sustainable systems. Much need to be done. But again, it's there in front of us. Let us see now, in case, so it's something which is so positive. We are talking about the good water policies and the forest policies. Resource management in India, in case we critically analyze it, we find has undergone a change in recent years, but the equitable change is yet to be seen. Our country is so large. The policies framed are mostly pro-urban middle class, but the interests of the large underclass, tribal population and also of the villagers are slightly sometimes compromised, right from the participation in the management process and to the framing of policies for resource appraisal and its management. The people participation is not so much as we want it to be. This is mostly due to the bureaucratic approach of the state in this dimension. The organization and their policies are by large concerned with the preventive methods in resource addressal. The aspect of enhancing the quality of resources, like that of the air and water, are absent if present are seen only in traces. The technical advancement still lags behind that of the developed states. The fast deteriorating air quality calls for a highly technical system of air purifier apparatus, which is both affordable and efficient. In this context, what we need is to pull the economic resources in this area. The issue of ineffective governance, somewhere along the line, when it comes to the implementation, we need to formulate, we need to be more forceful, and the government needs to be much more focused. So that means their policies, implementation is a concern. We are happy that we have it. So what have we learned today? The laws like Coal Bearing Act and Special Economic Zones are meant to manage resources in order to facilitate generally global imperial expansionism. In India, those concerned with resource management are mostly dealing with the resources like water, air and soil, which are the concerns of the consumerist middle class. And it's very nice that we have water forest and air policies. The concerns of lower and the underclass still remains unaddressed or need to be addressed in a much more forceful way. Social forestry programs of the 80s led to some innovations in the legislative and institutional framework, but they proved to be short-lived, either due to lack of application or due to the undermining by other rules which negated the power control and access provided to the local community. We need to work towards it. Within government program design, there is now an increasing rhetoric on the symbiotic relationship between forests and the forest dwellers. Again, I will say it is very positive. And of the need to address the issue of poverty elevation, we need to really become forceful. Provision of gainful employment, we again need to be slightly more focused, and empowerment of tribal and women in the forest sector is something at least we are talking about and we are working towards it. In some states it has been successful too. The policies framed are mostly, we know it, by are not touching the rural or the bottom citizens of the country, but all said and done, it is something so positive that at a country level, because we are the country, we as a region is the one who believe in God, who believed in that supernatural power, and where we also worship nature. So it is high time that we all decide that we will take care of the country's natural assets. And I think so, I am very sure that we all are moving towards it, and we would also want that in the years to come, our country would be the one that will give direction to everybody and to guide people on how to take care of natural resources. I am so hopeful that with all of you, the ones who are listening to this lecture and the one who went through this paper of resource geography or any other, are basically the social citizens of this country, would take care of the natural resources. Also, whatever power that lies with them would also see to it that we have our policy initiatives earmarked by the government not only on paper, but they also reach those people for which it has been designed, and we have proper implementation of them, and it empowers local communities, tribal communities and women and all those people, forest dwellers, the ones who live in forests, and all those people, the ones who need water. We all need these resources. It's something which is such a treasure for all of us. I think so that India is going to, in the days to come, will set up those guidelines and institutional framework where other countries will look up upon us. Enjoy the country, enjoy everything, and thank you.